than necessary today. So thank you for coming, first of all. Just some of the stuff, and we'll refer to this throughout the next hour or so, or next few minutes, but just some general information in there. The Varimax stuff and the water stuff we'll cover, but just some of the other things to make you aware of that we offer. The Yield 360 stuff, the wide drop, we put a flyer in there on that. DigiFarm, but you can kind of look at that through the presentation and see if you have any questions at the end. We'll kind of bounce back to that at the end. So, guys, help yourself to cookies back there, coffee.
Okay.
All right. Well, we'll kind of go ahead and get started. Before I get started, please stop me and ask questions as we go along. And if you don't agree with something or you think I'm full of BS, Mike, tell me, okay? And we'll have a not an argument, but it'll be a good discussion. So, so the big question we'll cover here in the next few minutes: are you applying the right amount of water in the end? So to give you a little bit of background, throughout the talk you'll hear me talk Precision Crop Management, or PCM platform, and then Varimax is the other thing that we'll refer to. But essentially, the Precision Crop Management is kind of the platform that we developed for first of all, for the irrigation scheduling, and then now we're in the process of incorporating the Varimax, or the nitrogen management component, into it. So since we moved back, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago now, really my main objectives or goals have been to find ways to improve water use efficiency and nitrogen use efficiency. 4 years later, we're finally getting there, I think, in providing you guys tools and consultants tools to use in an effort to improve that water use and nitrogen use efficiency. So we'll talk about that quite a bit. So a little more background. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but in 2014, we started working with J&J Irrigation and Dusty and Jim on some variable rate irrigation studies. Some of these were zone-based, some of them were nozzle by nozzle, and this really got the ball started rolling as far as irrigation scheduling and trying to figure out how to make variable rate irrigation work and try to quantify some of the potential water savings and yield benefits. Initially, we were relying on soil moisture probes to schedule our irrigation, and I know probably how many of you guys have used moisture probes in the past. So most of you. So one of the things that you probably know, of course, that those are pretty pricey, especially over the long haul. Some of them we don't know how long they'll last. I mean, probes in general have been around for several years. And my problem with probes was always, I felt like I needed 3 or 4 in every field to really schedule irrigation with. And that's just, especially when corn at $3, $3.50 is just too pricey to do. But initially we started using those. And then I guess it was in the fall of 2015. I think after harvest, I was sitting in the office looking at ET data from one of the fields. We had weather stations by all of our VRI fields, and I started looking at that and I said, "Man, our ET is identical to our water use from our moisture probes." And so I'm like, "Well, why are we spending money on moisture probes if we do a really good job with ET and modeling and estimating ET?" We can do the same thing for probably a quarter of the cost. So that kind of that's where we started and how we got to the ET-based irrigation scheduling that we'll talk about. One other thing that we did over the last couple of years is that in a few fields we put drain gauges to collect leachate from. So in 2015, we had one of those in hard ground, south of Ray, and we didn't collect any leachate at all from that drain gauge, which we really weren't surprised. Even though we had a wet year, we know in that heavy textured ground we don't have a lot of potential to leach anything. And I guess I should have described these a little bit. So these are 20-inch 20-inch diameter cylinders that we kind of that we drive into the ground to get an intact soil core, and then we excavate a hole, and then we basically take the tube and put it over in the hole we excavated. And I usually supervise why Preston does that. So in the hard ground, we really haven't seen anything. I'll show a few results from North Array and some sand. So the reason why we wanted to do this, obviously, we wanted to try to quantify, how much when we over irrigated or when we irrigated precisely, how much did we still have, how much were we prone to leaching, and especially in the case of nitrogen. So that's a little bit of background there on those drain gauges. So this is from last year. Like I said, North Array and a valent sand, very typical for North Array, south of Holyoke. These drain gauge locations here, so this E2 and E3 is from an area of the field, is from a bottom area of the field where, good high yield potential. The west 2, 4, 5, and 6 are basically from, one of a typical really bad valent sand hill, North Array. Low productivity, you're lucky to get 180, 190 bushel from that. So the inches of water here, so this is for the cropping season. In this case, it was May 11th or May 10th to October. I don't know when harvest or when we pulled those drain gauges. Sometime in middle of October. But this is the amount of water in inches that we collected in those drain gauges. And I'll be honest, because we were disturbing soil, it's probably not 100% accurate, but we did have enough observations. You can see we ranged anywhere from 2.39 in that bottom area, or that bottom ground, clear up to 8.77. Now I think this 8.77 is probably a little bit high, but on average we had 4.95 inches of water that we caught in that drain gauge, and that's with, this is a circle where we followed this irrigation scheduling to a T. So I was quite surprised, and most of this was just from rainfall events. Right after an irrigation event, we'd get an inch or 8/10 of rain, and just too much for that sand to hold. So this is really what we were after. I mean, we were interested in this, but this nitrate nitrogen. So July 1st and then October 20th, or whenever we collected that last leachate. So July 1st, I went out and we collected that leachate, and then we did it at the end of the season to determine how much nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, chloride, sulfur, boron that we had leached past that root zone. So when we compare it to the percent of nitrogen that the farmer applied in this case, we range anywhere from 10% to 36% of that nitrogen. Now that's not necessarily nitrogen that he applied. That could have been residual nitrate. It could have been nitrogen from the sprinkler. But just to give you an idea, on average we were at 24% of that nitrogen that he applied was caught in those drain gauges. So which is really not that surprising, I don't think. I mean, some years are worse than others, but we'll continue to do that and see what numbers are in the next few years. I think the most surprising thing to me was the potassium and ortho-P numbers. So these west drain gauges have had a history of manure within the last 10 years. So those numbers are a little bit higher. But we know those valent sands don't have a lot of capacity to hold on to anything essentially, but even the positively charged cations like potassium, which normally we don't think leach or move. You can see we caught anywhere from 16 pounds clear up to 201, but these two numbers up here in that better soil is still quite surprising. Ortho-P numbers. Of course, phosphorus is immobilized pretty quick after application, so really it's significant that we got anything above 0 in those drain gauges. So the only reason I show you those is just to, you know, if we were over irrigating in this situation, it would make all those numbers even worse. So that just to give you a background of kind of where we came from and what we were doing or what we are doing and will continue to do to try to improve that water use and nitrogen use efficiency.
A question, how did you derive at those pounds?
Okay, good question. So the we know this. We know the circumference of the drain gauges, and when we get the concentration back from the analysis from the soil testing lab, so they give you just the concentration, but then they also give you, most labs will give you pounds of nutrient per 9 inches of applied, because most of the time they're doing it for irrigation water analysis. So, but it's essentially math. I mean, you know the area that drain gauge was, and
so it's just off a water sample.
Yep. Concentration and nutrients in water samples. So the higher the leachate, and that's the case. This was 8.77 inches, so that's partly why that's a bigger number there. So good question. So like I said, we discovered that, man, if we use local weather data, we can do a really good job of estimating ET and predicting crop water needs. Most of the stuff we'll talk about is corn, but really we can do it in any crop. We spend a majority of our time in corn though. Really is what we do is, in most situations, is take a texture on 0 to 24 inch sample to get percent sand, silt, and clay. So from that, we can determine what our water holding capacity is. So in the instance of hard ground south array, typically in the top 24 inches of soil, we can hold anywhere from 4 to 5.5 inches of water at any given time. North of town in the worst valent sand, we're talking about a 1/2 inch in the top 2 feet, which is less. I used to always use a general rule of thumb, 1 inch per foot of soil. In some cases that's accurate, but in those worst valent sands, it's closer to a 1/2 inch, or an inch. Sorry, an inch per 2 feet of soil. The other thing that we do is we always want to be in the craze corn hybrid specific. So in the system, which we'll show you in a little bit, we're modeling crop growth. So obviously let's say 111, 112 day hybrid is gonna have a little bit different watering requirement than a 101 day. So we're basically modeling GDDs and estimating growth stage to fine tune that system. One of the things that we do, somewhat unique compared to other ET models and stuff, is that we're looking 5 days into the future. So this isn't as important early in the season, but you get in the middle of the season when you got high peak demand or short wells. We always want to be looking forward to kind of take some of that into account. So we got 5 days estimated ET based on the forecast in these grayed out areas, which we'll show when we pull up the website, but is actual ET for the last 2 days. This is just where your soil water holding capacity is determined. This happens to be a sandy loam, and I think it's 2.1 inches. I mean, that never changes after that texture and organic matter is entered. That's what shows up. Some of the things that everybody's management style and everybody's management style and kind of philosophy is a little bit different. So one of the things that we do is we offer, customize it by field or management style. So obviously, and this will show up better when we pull up the website, but basically this is a graph that you would be able to look at for each field that shows the current water holding capacity. So usually with corn and most other crops, our limits are set at 50 and 100. When we get to 50% plant available water, that's when we start seeing yield potential take a hit. The green line is a target line, which you can set. We basically break it up into 3 different parts of the growing season: early season, mid-season, and late season. So depending on your soil type, management style, well capacity, oftentimes in the sand where we have good wells or in the hard ground where we have good wells, we'll set that target level at 85 to 90% early in the season. Then middle of the season when we've got high demand, we're usually at 95 or 100% target. So, but like I said, I'll show you where you customize those. The other thing I had mentioned, we needed local weather data, reliable weather data. And so last year we went out and put up 16 weather stations around the region. And typically we tried, wherever we had fields, we wanted a weather station within 5 to 7 miles was our goal. And I think most of those we met. We'll probably be adding a few weather stations this year, but everybody has access to all weather stations. So you can click on the weather station and we update that data every hour. So you have access to 16 weather stations, at least 16 weather stations every hour. So kind of show you some of the results before we go any further. Since 2014, our water use efficiency has increased by 25%. And what I mean by water use efficiency is basically bushels of grain removed versus inches of water applied, and that's applied either rainfall or with irrigation. So it's taking into account irrigation. And we've decreased water use by 20%. And this 20% is derived not from historic use, but actually in our variable rate irrigation studies over the last 3 years, we have dedicated a portion of that field so the farmer could manage those the way he always does. So that's what we compare it to as far as how much water that would have got applied to the whole field versus what we've done with either VRI or irrigation scheduling. So these 2013, 2014 are years for this specific field where we did not have the farmer had a consultant, so typical irrigation scheduling, kind of did it like he always did it. Water use efficiencies at 6 and 7 bushels an inch, and then in 2015 and 2016 we were at 11.3 and 10.7. So this is a combination of VRI and better irrigation scheduling. I think the majority of it probably is just due to better irrigation scheduling in general, but some of it is due to VRI as well.
So were there any extraordinary weather events in, let's say, 13 and 14, let's say a 4-inch rainstorm?
So, comparing, I haven't looked at that specifically, but I would say no more so than in 2015 or 2016. But good question. And all of those years, you'd characterize as wet, or maybe a little bit wetter than normal during the growing season. Good question. So this last year, we've got the platform up and going right at planting or right after planting. So we had about 17,500 what I would call sand acres. We try to separate sand acres from hard ground just to give a better comparison, because we tried to make across the fence comparisons, and we really weren't getting a lot of good data to compare against. So I thought I'm just going to put the numbers up there and let you guys decide for yourself if we did a good job or not. So we had 17,500 acres or thereabouts around Eckley, mainly north of Ray. Most of these were Haxton Valent sands. So over those, the average water pumped was 14.8 inches, and that's either from meters or power coefficients. Average rainfall over all those acres was 11 inches and 11.33. Average yield over all those acres was 231.8 bushels. Yield range from 191 to 283. So we had a wide range of yields. Some of the fields north of Ray, north of Eckley, really tough valent sands, a few around 200. But that gives you an idea of the general range. Water use efficiency was 9.0 bushels per inch. And kind of back to add on to your comment, Mike, if you think about the amount of rainfall or extra water that we collected in our drain gauges, those couple inches in there, if we take those out, then that gets us to about 10 to 11. And most of the scientific literature or studies that have been done on water use efficiency is you theoretically should be somewhere in that 10 to 11 bushels per inch. So I don't know if we'll ever get there in the sand just because of our loss potential, but definitely an improvement over historic use. So not near as many acres in the hard ground, and then we kind of picked the acres that we routinely scouted every week on a weekly basis. The 3,500 acres in hard ground north of Yuma and south of Eckley and Ray. In 2017, average water pump 14.6 inches, and a lot of that comes from around those Yuma acres, which didn't receive quite as much rainfall. Average rainfall was 10.4 inches. Average yield was 249.1 bushel, and our range was 222 to 285. Water use efficiency number was higher, 9.9 bushels per inch in this case, and that probably goes back to figuring a little bit less leaching or water loss potential in there. This is just some one of the things, and we can visit about the VRI portion of it later, or if you have questions on that now. We're still collecting data. When we build the VRI portion into the irrigation scheduling platform, we want to make sure it's right. And one of the things that we still have questions on is population. So where we variable rate the seeding, how much, if we go from 26,000 to 36,000, how much do we need to factor in that change on water use? And this is just from 1 year of data. That's kind of a messy graph, I apologize. The top line here is at 32, planted at 32,000. This blue line's at 40,000. So the one thing you'll notice is early in the season, up until mid-June, we really don't have a big difference between those. But as soon as those corn plants start rapid growth, we start to see a difference. The water content in this 40,000 plot drops off quite a bit faster, using more water than the 32,000. And then late in the season, it runs parallel again. But in that middle part of the season, the irrigation season, it appears to me like we've got different water use, which would make sense. But almost everybody I talked to, plant physiologists and stuff, they said, oh no, your water use will be the same, even at 8,000 different, anything over 32,000, they said it would be the same water use. So there's some things I'm not confident in enough yet to build it into the system. So any VRI stuff, we're kind of managing manually, I guess you could say, and coming up with prescriptions on a weekly basis or that. So we can visit about that later. So after the nitrogen portion of the presentation, we'll kind of get back in and look in the system. But so basically, our main platform is a cloud-based system. So anytime you enter data into it, you've got to have internet connectivity. We're in the development phase of an app, which should be ready in a week or two. Essentially, the app will be used mainly for the field as far as entering irrigation amounts, nitrogen amounts, to kind of streamline that because we want to make that manual entry as easy as possible. So this is just an example. A producer can pull up his map of his farm when he opens the app, and basically this will be color-coded. So red means it's below that 50% level. Plant available water. Green means good, above 85%, and this is in the 85 to 75%. So it kind of color codes things of where they at or where they are at, And then, like I said, add water event and fertilizer event, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. So, and I can pull it up live, give you a little bit better look. But any questions on that specifically? Okay, I'll turn it over to Tim Foster. He'll visit about the Varimax component. Like I said, it's always been my goal to kind of tie the nitrogen and the water thing together, especially for the sand. But he's going to visit a little bit about corn and the potential for the Varimax on wheat. So I'll turn it over to him.
Well, most of you know me and wonder where I've been for the last 8 months. Wasn't out scouting your fields or whatnot. I was working with a company called Varimax, a real-time nitrogen management company. And we'll go into detail a little bit more of what we do, what the program does, what the program provides. But first, let's start with a few basics around nitrogen. Nitrogen is very mobile. You all know that. We find it in the atmosphere. Over 78% of the Earth's atmosphere is made up of nitrogen. We take that nitrogen from the atmosphere, turn it into fertilizers, and that's what our commercially applied fertilizers. That's where they come from. But then you go into the soil. You have denitrification, leaching, mineralization, immobilization, all these different processes within the soil that are affecting where that plant available nitrogen is. And so how do we capture that, and how do we get it into the plant versus where is it going? So with Varimax, we kind of answer that question and help provide a tool for that. So mineralization, what is it? That is the conversion of nitrogen from an organic form to an inorganic form that's available to plants. You find it in residue, but as microbes break that residue down, then it becomes available to the plants. But when does it become available? And so another big thing out in this part of the world, it's drier, but like for the last 8 months, it's been pretty dry. And so when you get into these wetting periods for like wheat, it becomes more moist, and so then you have a flush of mineralization. So when is that going to happen, and how much nitrogen are you going to get? These are some of the questions that sometimes we overlook or we just estimate. Like K-State recommendations for soil test, they recommend. They say that you get 20 pounds for every percent of nitrogen or every percent of organic matter, but that's only an estimation. And so Varimax is keying in on some of these points to provide you with a more accurate recommendation. So, Chad was talking about water use efficiency. Well, you also have nitrogen use efficiency. So if, looking at your total amount of nitrogen that you apply, where is it going? Some's getting lost, some is being used by the microbes and being immobilized. So the the soil takes it, the microbes take it and make it immobile for the plants, or unusable for the plants at the current time. Plus then you have the percent that's used by the plants. Worldwide, nitrogen use efficiency is about 35%. So that means that only 35% of the nitrogen that is applied actually goes into the plant. In the U.S., it's about 45% on average. Here in the Great Plains, it's about 50%. There's a lot of ways to increase your nitrogen use efficiency, and that's where Varimax comes into play, increasing that efficiency, and how do we do that? Here was an example or a study that was done or the information that was pulled from OSU between 2004 and 2015 to show the variation in crop needs from year to year with the nitrogen applications and how much was needed by the plants. So a plant needs, a wheat plant needs about 1.2 pounds per bushel. Corn needs about 0.8 pounds per bushel. But you talk about NUE, mineralization, things like that, that's going to change that number. Here, for corn, we shoot for that 1 pound. It depends on the producer and whatnot. You shoot for that 1 pound in corn when it only needs 0.8. So where's the rest coming from? Where's the rest going? Those are some things to think about. And this was all done on a wheat study across 11 years, and it averaged 68 pounds per 50 bushels per acre, which is about 1.5 pounds per bushel. But look at the swing from year to year. You went from 100 pounds down to 0 over here. So where is the plant getting its nitrogen? So then just thinking more about this nitrogen use efficiency and profitability, here was a study done at K-State where they took some pre-plant applications, 120 pounds to 200 pounds, compared it to some split applications, and compared it to using sensor technology. The biggest thing that you can grasp from this is you increased your efficiency as well as your yields. And this was a study that was done over 3 years, so this is an average from 3 years. And where was your highest profitability is where you optimize your yield for the nitrogen you apply. So where it keys in is putting on that right rate for that field, for that acre. And how do we do that? One way is using sensor technology. In-season split applications, you know a lot about split applications on corn. Think about this in wheat as well. So here was another study that was done. This was where split applications came into play. One was an early application compared to another one at V4, compared to V10, and then a split application. And the highest profitability, so the total nitrogen to yield, you had the highest profitability. You had the highest NUEs when you split applied, when you moved that throughout the season, and you reduced your risk by those split applications. Any questions so far, I guess? Okay, so what is Varimax? We're a real-time crop management company that seeks to make simple solutions for farmers. So answering all those, you saw the nitrogen cycle and all that diversity. We're helping to answer some of those questions so you don't have to think about those all day long and try to figure it out and try to estimate. And we want to help farmers make those in-season decisions for their cropping inputs using cutting-edge technology. So what do we do? How does the program work? So we're scanning the crop using imagery. We're evaluating that crop's capacity. So we're taking a snapshot at the point in time that you want to make that you want to make an application. We evaluate the crop's capacity at that time in season, and then we make that recommendation. Instead of doing 100% before you even get into the season, why don't you wait until you start to see how the season's shaping out? There's been a lot of work around late season nitrogen application, pushing for that later nitrogen application and reducing your risk. The plant doesn't need it very early, and so why don't you wait and make a decision then? So how are we scanning the crop? Currently, our main satellite that we're using is Sentinel. It has 10-meter resolution. When it comes to nitrogen management, you don't need that super high resolution imagery, so we're using kind of a lower resolution. Sentinels, we can get the price down to where it's more economical for you. And then we're also using Landsat. So Sentinels, that's a European Space Agency satellite constellation. You have Landsat, that's a U.S. constellation. Those are our main sources, but we're looking into some other systems, Astrodigital, and also possibly working with TerraAvion for some manned flights as well. So looking at these different options, but our main source is working with Sentinel, which Sentinel has a return time of every 5 days. Which nitrogen, you need the crop to respond to see what the crop is doing to make a change on that. So our base map that we're working with is an NDVI map. You all have heard of NDVI maps. It's a normalized difference vegetative index. Well, what does that do for you? You know, a lot of companies may just hand you a map and say, here you go. You know, you have a legend between 0 and 1, and 1 looks great and 0 looks horrible. Well, but what does that do for you? So I'll first talk a little bit about this. So an NDVI map, what it actually is with looking at the near infrared spectrum, you're looking at the plant cells out there. So you're counting we're counting the total number of plant cells out there in essence. And then the red, the visible red, that is looking at the amount of photosynthesis that's happening out there. So you don't see red out there because the plant is pulling red in to convert and spit out green light. And so the greener it is, the more it's photosynthesizing. So we're looking at the red spectrum and near infrared. So we're looking at, in essence, overall biomass of the crop. And so then we can take that and determine what the capacity of that crop is based on its factory, in essence. But, you know, you have a pretty image, but what do you do with a pretty image? You need the brains behind it. And that's where algorithms come into play. And there's very few out there. We've actually partnered with K-State to bring this algorithm, or bring their knowledge of algorithms and things like that into Varimax to, in essence, make an easy platform for you guys to just go out and apply the nitrogen, take the map and look and see and go, instead of having to crunch numbers and do everything yourself. We're taking the hard steps out of it so you can do the easy part. And so we're retrieving the imagery from these satellites. We're standardizing that imagery, making it constant across the year. And that's where we can make it a usable image. And then we run our algorithm. And so here's our focus. Our crop focuses this upcoming year, our winter wheat and corn. So we have different algorithms for each management strategy that you're working with. We're trying to make it broad to capture everybody's different management practices, but so we'll work with you in that respect. We have a basic and intensive management program for wheat. You know, intensive management on wheat, you know, putting out that variable rate application in that field so you can capture that right rate for every acre. And then with that multiple application, you can get a better idea later in the season of where you need to be for your nitrogen needs. And same for corn. Here we have an intensive program, which this is our spoon-fed program. So you come in, we'll start at V4 to V6 time frame, and you can go in and put your side dress application on via variable rates, and then every 2 weeks we'll give you a nitrogen recommendation for you to log into Chad's website, and where you're filling out your water needs, you can then look at your nitrogen needs and say, how much do I need to put through my pivot? So helping you with some of these issues, you know, these later season nitrogen needs, later season water needs, we're helping to answer those questions. So here's what a output example would look like. We're going to provide both a yield potential estimate and a nitrogen recommendation. So thinking about this yield potential recommendation or estimate, this is a tool that it's not a yield map. It may match up exactly with yield at the end of season, or it may not. You know, this is a snapshot in time. You still have the rest of the season for things to go haywire. You can have disease pressure, weed pressure, you know, all these things coming into play, which we're not going to account for at that point in time. And so it's a good tool to, you know, for management decisions, for like wheat. Should I even bother putting on a fungicide application? Things like that. It helps, thinking about the economics of it and whatnot. I mean, I wouldn't go and use this for marketing by any means. We definitely don't want to recommend that. Go sell all your corn or wheat, and then come to the end of the year and you might be in a world of hurt. So anyways, so we're providing, both of these every time you obtain an image or obtain a recommendation. So just providing those to you to help you with your management decisions in season. So does the program work? Here, this last year, I ran this on a half circle, and we put an extra 20 pounds on the north end of this field, and we had no benefit to that extra applied nitrogen over what we recommended with Varimax. So there was no increased yield by applying any more. And here was the yield, here was the yield potential, and here was the nitrogen recommendation. And this was done at R1, and this is our yields at that time. So then for wheat, here was an example of where at green up to jointing in between those stages, we obtained a yield potential of 60 bushels per acre. We obtained that NDVI image, and we calculated this yield potential, and you can see at harvest we had 63 bushel. So there was no disease pressure, things like that, to decrease yield, and we were 4 months prior to harvest, and we determined that. And the main benefit of it was normally the producer would apply 70 pounds of nitrogen based on his practices, soil tests, things like that, and we only recommended 40 pounds. That was a 30 bushel nitrogen savings by using this type of technology, using sensor technology. So here in 2017, we did this across 7,000 acres of wheat. We had a 12 bushel increase over historical yield. On average, we had nitrogen use efficiency averaged 1.5 pounds in comparison with K-State's 2.4 pounds of nitrogen recommendation. And then protein, we increased yield or increased protein on average by 1.2%. One of the big things, is the big talks is around protein. With protein, it's directly related to nitrogen, and also, your end of season head fill and things like that. But a major player is your fertility. If you're shorting it on nitrogen, in a good year where you have high yields, and you're using your average rate, you might be cutting it short of nitrogen. So you may have bumper crops, but you don't have the the rest of the nitrogen to finish out the protein. But then in those years where you have low yields, you have high protein. That usually plays a factor. And so, thinking back to that slide about the economic optimum nitrogen rate, where year to year it changed between 0 to 100 pounds of nitrogen, that plays a big role in this protein piece. And so we're helping to, by measuring that yield capacity in the season, we can then determine what your nitrogen needs are throughout the year and for each year, and get it closer than what maybe you normally would do. And then we also have that VR application piece. The question is, what do we need per acre? What do we need per swath across the field? And we had a savings of a minimum of $4.36 in comparison to applying that rate, a maximum rate across the field for optimum nitrogen needs. And instead we got the average. So, any other questions that you may have had or would like to have explained a little bit better? Or is it clear as mud? If not, I'll turn it back over to Chad.
Thanks. So I've been, this past week or two, I've been visiting with Scott Haley, the CSU wheat breeder, and mainly getting his input on for wheat and bird on, because that's majority of our acres are bird in the region, or a large percentage of them, and kind of getting his idea of what that should be under normal growing conditions and so forth. And so I got to doing some economics, basic economics, but over the last, visit with a couple of the grain buyers and stuff, and over the last 10 years, they both estimated that probably on average it's been about a 25% premium on protein over that 10 years. Some years it's zero. This last year is like $1.60, I think, is the highest I've heard for 12.5% protein. But if you figure that 50 bushel yield per acre yield, which is pretty low for the last few years in some cases, but that's $12.50 per acre. So when I think about the wheat, the Varimax on wheat and similar approaches, I mean, from all the studies that I've been associated with, there's comparisons when I've seen traditional fertilizer practice versus this. It almost always comes out in favor. So I mean, I don't know why we need to be doing this on all of our wheat acres. It's just, especially with wheat, you know, we've got a long winter period with mineralization or lack of mineralization in some years. And then when the spring were really wet, higher yield potential, more mineralization, we need to try to capture some of that. But this is some data that Dwayne Westfall from CSU, and a lot of this data came from the Eastern Plains, but he typically, the guidelines he came up with a few years ago was essentially anything under 12% probably lost a little bit of yield, and for sure protein from lack of nitrogen. You get below 11.1%, significant yield reduction, and of course protein content takes a big hit. Now the last few years, I mean, we've had 60 to 100 bushel wheat, maybe a little bit over 100 bushel wheat in some instances. So naturally, when you get that high yield, you're going to have a little bit lower protein. It's just inherent. You're going to be a little bit lower, but we shouldn't be in that 9% or 10% that a lot of our wheat has been. So the general rule of thumb is for wheat, the longer you can wait to apply nitrogen, the higher your protein content is going to be. So we want to start capturing some of that extra yield potential, but yet maintain as high a protein content as we do. So this morning there was quite a bit of discussion on, especially for wheat, and we'll get back into corn. But as far as when should we use that imagery to make that in recommendation? And it kind of depends on, it's kind of field specific and management strategy specific too. If you've got a field where you've got 30 to 50 pounds on either as a starter or residual, there's really no big need or big hurry in getting a yield estimate done or image collected. We can postpone that until week 6 or 7 around that time. We don't want to wait too long, of course, but the longer we wait, the better the yield potential estimate will be. So it kind of depends. It's specific to the field and how much N you've had on as starter or residual. So there's a couple different strategies you can go. My thinking is ideally, in a perfect situation, is you have about 30 pounds on at planting or with residual, and then you go out now or when we have precip, maybe right before green up, put another 20 or 30 pounds on, and then we come back and right before joining or right at joining to put that variable rate shot on with whatever the Varimax algorithm tells us. I think that's a perfect situation. I know it's another trip across the field, but if we can capture that extra protein and yield, you can easily pay for it. So,
but the hesitation there is lodging.
Yeah, good question or comment. It is, but if you shouldn't, if we're matching yield potential with nitrogen, we should be okay. I mean, when you see lodging is typically when you have excess nitrogen or just ideal conditions for growth. So as long as we're matching that yield potential, you know, with the right in rate, we should be okay.
Because it's going to evaluate that biomass out there, and so if it sees a lush amount of biomass, it's not going to tell you to put on 200 more pounds or 100 more pounds. It's going to hold you back, and that's where I was talking about that mineralization piece. It's measuring, it's evaluating that biomass to say for a 100 bushel crop or for a 50 bushel crop, this is all you need. And so above that, you won't need any nitrogen.
So in the bottom areas, let's say it's irrigated or just really good dry land. So in those areas, it's most likely going to say 0 or a very low in rate. So I could make an argument that it would improve, or you would have less down wheat. I mean, it all depends on the year, but it's going to look at that and say that crop's healthy and it has enough in or biomass there and in to make, you know, 80 bushel or 90 or whatever it is.
Well, what's 120?
Well, 120. Plug your number in there you want. No, good question though.
How do you put it on that late and not risk burning it?
Okay, good question, and that's something that was brought up this morning. So, of course, it all depends on the rates, you know, that it's calling for. So, you know, obviously, we you know, have to look at potentially mixing it with water or streaming it on. I mean, as long as that flag leaf's not out, which, you know, we should be doing it before then. But, you know, streaming it on, I don't really worry about leaf burn that much. I mean, it's relatively cosmetic, as long as it's not too late or the flag leaf's out. So,
And time of day as well.
yeah.
Do it early in the morning or late in the day, not at the heat of the day when you have more volatilization and things like that.
But yeah, and I would never use a flat fan nozzle or anything like that at that stage. So, good question. This is something I'll just mention before I jump to the website. So this is an example of a field around Ray last year where we did a variable rate in rec or got that image, and this is something that we haven't built in. We're going to try to beta test this summer, but this is for guys that have a variable rate fertilizer pump or fertigation pump. You know, if they want to turn that image basically into a sector-based application. Now, this probably is not going to be a good fit for every field, but, you know, if your field's naturally broke up into, you know, pie shapes, or you can break it up into sectors. So this is not the only advantage of this versus like a side dress application is that we can do this later in the season. We don't have to do it when the corn's V6 or V8. So, if anybody does have a variable rate fertilizer pump and is interested in it, we'll hopefully we'll be beta testing that this summer. So this is since we're kind of talking about the nitrogen, let me jump over here. So this is generally what the platform looks like for water and nitrogen. So some of the things for the Varimax system that we require, obviously single double intensive for the corn. We want seeding information. If it was flat rate, simply just put 32,000 or 33,000. Variable rate, there we can upload a shape file. So the algorithm takes that into account. So, because obviously the NDVI for a 26,000 stand is not going to be the same as a 36,000 stand. So that's important information to have. Yield history. So either past yield maps or preferably is what we want to do the best job possible is a management zone. So if you do a multi-year yield analysis, or if you have done that, that's what you would load up. So that way, you know, if that hill's never averaged over 180 bushel, we're not gonna say that it has a capability of averaging 260, so. Yield goal, just your base yield goal for that field, whether it be 240, 250, or 220, whatever it is. Equipment limitation, so basically, when we create that prescription file in the system, we want to make sure that it can meet the range of your pump or your applicator. So, you know, if it's 10 to 30 gallons or whatever it would be, is where you enter that. The crop quality part is just more as a note for us if there is hail damage or maybe higher weed pressure in a certain area of the field. It's better, the more information we have, the better recommendation we can make. So this is roughly what, this is still being tested, but essentially this is what this will look like. So like Tim said, starting around V4 for that intensive managed corn, every 2 weeks we'd be updating this and giving you a yield potential or capacity. You'll see both those terms used interchangeably, capacity and potential, and a nitrogen recommendation. So the one on the right is the nitrogen recommendation, and as well as the variable rate one, we'll also have a flat rate number. So when you get to putting fertilizer through the sprinkler, you'll essentially have a flat rate number there you can go off of too. So that's updated every 2 weeks in that intensive spoon feeding approach. Otherwise, it would be 2 or 3 times. A lot of guys are in the hard ground. We'll just do that 2 to 3 pass approach, and then the dryland guys obviously probably just a one pass approach. Something else for the nitrogen management that we've built in is basically you can enter your nitrogen applications. Is what this graph is going to do is it models your crop growth stage, and then there's this nitrogen uptake is the theoretical nitrogen uptake. So at V6 or V4, we need to have at least 25 pounds of N on, and this red line is the actual applied. This is just a scenario or a case example. It won't look that smooth in real time, but so basically we're tracking how much N should be on that field theoretically at that given growth stage, just so you guys can compare and have a reference. Any questions about the nitrogen portion of that? Okay. So this is the irrigation. Irrigation. So most of the time, guys, this year or this past year would look in the morning and see what their current water status was here. I have 3 fields entered here. I just entered these yesterday, so I just put planting date as the end of November. But here you have your irrigation required to reach ideal target, which we've talked about that ideal target. ET from yesterday, ET from today, tomorrow, in 7 days, and then the crop growth stage. So very, very seldom do you have to actually go into a field and look at it. Sometimes we would if there was problems or something like that. Go back. So some of the other things or features on here is the field log. So you can enter notes here. Some guys kept track of their nitrogen applications here last year. Some guys did their pesticide applications, and some guys put down there every time they started it and who started that sprinkler. But you can enter. You just hit the plus sign and enter the note. Your agronomist has access to this as well. Crop consultant, and we encourage you guys to. I mean, we want to work with your crop consultants or agronomists. We're not trying to replace them by any means. This is just a tool for them to better help you schedule irrigation and in. Then in this field, this is the ET. As you can see, we don't have much ET for the next couple days. And this is based off forecast here. This water holding capacity, this is for a field around Holyoke hard ground. It's a silt loam, 4.37 inches of storage capacity. And we do have an area for soil moisture sensors. However, I hope one day we don't need those or use them. But this is just a profile, so that if you wanted to drill down in this specific field and look since planting, where that blue line is the moisture, current, or at any given day is the moisture. I don't know why the dates aren't showing up on the screen. But in this pink line here is basically estimating, or is taking this next 5 days and estimating what it'll be, what that profile will be at the end of those 5 days. So that's useful. End of the season irrigation, and then basically, how many days can I leave my pivot off if we get a rainfall or something like that. Any questions about that?
So are you treating each field as one soil type, or are you adjusting variable rate sprinkler?
Good. So good question. So currently we're basically, is what we recommend is taking that texture sample, and if you want to manage, we've been doing it on 24 inches, just because 85 to 90% of that water that a corn plant or most plants use is from that top 2 feet. So we do have some guys going to 30 inches, which is fine, but we typically will take grab that texture sample from what you believe to be the worst or the lowest holding capacity part of that soil or that field. So we do encourage you to take another one from a better area or a middle area. But from our experience, we always, if we do the worst area of that field, then we're doing okay in those other areas. So eventually we'll have that built in and the VRI component built in, so that you can manage those separately. If you wanted to compare that during the season, though, that's a question Marty asked this morning. You could enter that field twice and monitor them separately. From what I've seen doing that in the past, season long there won't be much difference. You may change your application depth at certain times during the year, but in the end there won't be a whole lot of difference. But good question. Preston today. Yeah, it tracks your, it's kind of blurry here. This tracks your water applied, well capacity, which we don't have anything built in. Currently, we don't have anything built in. And originally, we were going to take well capacity and estimate, when we got into peak water demand, how soon you needed to start the sprinkler ahead of the ET. But really, that's taken into account. That's really taken into account with this here, and then this in the graph. So we're kind of doing that indirectly, taking well capacity, and then obviously the producer knows when, how many days ahead he needs to start that. So the weather. So we don't have. So the one thing we tried to automate. Weather, the precip, so we didn't have to manually enter that. We started off with radar based, and it's just not accurate enough. Sometimes it's right on, sometimes it's 2, 3, 4 tenths off, and that you do that a couple times, and then you're an inch ahead or an inch behind. So we do require manual entry for the irrigation events and the rainfall events. You can do this. The irrigation events aren't usually a big deal, because if you start everything at a ½ inch or 6 tenths or 7 tenths, you can enter all those, basically select all the fields and enter them in one shot. So I'll admit, last year to start with, guys complained about it, but then they realized it improved the accuracy of stuff, and by the end, I don't think we had too many guys complain, did we, Preston?
Not that they told us anyways.
Either that or they got tired of us not listening.
Yeah.
So, but in the future, we hope that we can tie in with the sprinkler panels. So if you if you have a sprinkler panel that's connected to the cloud, that we can just grab that water event and enter it into the system. But that, I'm not gonna promise that's gonna happen for this year. So that was the weather map, so you can click on those. This is Ray Northeast, and we'll provide you with a list of exactly where those are. But you can get, like I said, real time. The last time this reported was at 2:21. And so you can get real time weather estimates, or not weather estimates, but weather measurements, temperature, rainfall, and wind speed and things like that. So, and also you have historic data that you have access to as well. And on this managed field table, we will add a nitrogen column here that basically has your pounds of N per acre. And we'll probably color code that as well, is if you're behind the theoretical amount, it'll probably be orange or red. Just so kind of give you an idea and make you aware if you're falling behind or if you're getting close to be behind or what. So any questions?
On water use efficiency and how fast running the sprinkler, let's say if you have a 95-degree day, which is more efficient? Fast, slow, evaporation, where's?
So that's a good question. So the way, from what I've seen, and I guess the data we've collected or the data I've seen is, I mean, your efficiency, once you get, and I've put, this is arbitrary, but I would argue that once you get above like 0.3, or plus or minus a little bit, once you get above 0.3, that you're going to lose on a really hot, windy day. You're going to lose probably at least 20% of that. But it doesn't matter, from what I've seen, it doesn't matter if it's a 1/2 inch or 0.8. You're going to lose 20% of that amount, if that makes sense. That's a good question. One of the things that didn't show, so one of the things we had mentioned is setting target levels and stuff. So one of the settings you can do is the irrigation and rainfall efficiency. And you can set this the same for all fields, or you can go through field by field to change. So is what we did last year, and is what we recommend, is that, so early season, which I have as December 1st, but let's put it in realistic terms. So let's say from May 1st to June 15th is what I would call early season. Small corn, lower temperatures, higher humidity, so our ET is less during that time frame. So we set it at 85, default to 85% efficient during that time. But then we go from June 15th to August 20th, this last year is where we kept it. We set our efficiency at either 70% or 75%, depending on sprinkler age, and then as well soil type. And then end of season, from August 20th to October 20th, or whatever you set as the theoretical harvest date, we're going to increase that efficiency a little bit because of cooler temperatures, and our drops are in the canopy. So that's something that we can work with you guys to set those efficiencies. But in really, I'd recommend, if you've got a really tough sand circle, you may want to change that efficiency to 70%. In that middle part of the season. So that's a good question.
That's gonna be available for us to look at?
Yep.
Where
Yep.
did you find that at?
Right, the gear there.
Oh, right there.
Yep.
That wasn't there last year, was it?
Yeah.
It was?
Yeah.
Oh.
How many times did you go to look for it?
I was like,
So-
if I could log on.
So the ideal profile configuration, this is where you set, same place as you set your efficiencies. This is, so like this was set at 85% for early season, mid-season 95, and end of season 85. So that kind of, when you're in the hard ground, you might want to set that end of season to 80% or something, because if you're storing 4 inches of water, you can afford to deplete that a little bit lower. Or early in the season, as long as you're not afraid of getting behind, you can set that a little bit lower too. So that's field by field. You got that capability, and we'll work with you on that to set it. And nothing says you can't change it halfway through the year too. And then we were talking this morning. Occasionally. This last year, we didn't have that many. Most of the time, when the ET model or estimates got off, it was because we didn't add an irrigation event or a rainfall event. So there was a couple occasions where we had to go in there and reset it after we hand checked the field. You can do that, or your agronomist can do that. It's not like it's locked.
So does it reset to full after a major rain event then?
Yeah, it should. Yeah. But that's a perfect time to reset it if you think it's off a little bit. Is either reset it after that sprinkler goes around, or you get an inch of rain and the profile's full. So.
Typically, you
In field setup, I'm not going to walk through that right now, but if you have a shape file of your boundary, you can import it, select your planting date, or when you think you're going to plant it, and then select your hybrid in the case of corn. The corn one is a lot more refined. We've done a lot more research with that. We used it on some pinto beans last year and soybeans, and it was accurate. We ended up running the pivot more often with pinto beans and stuff just to keep them cool. So we didn't really follow it, to a T as far as applying the amount that it called for. But those crops are all built in there. But potatoes I don't know. We have not. That's one of the things we hope to do this year is test it on some potato fields. But that's all in there, and with either the Varimax or the irrigation thing. We're here to help you guys get that set up and entered. We were talking this morning especially for the wheat's simple. You guys give us your boundary or latitude, longitude, or land legals, and we basically take care of everything from there, and we'll deliver you a yield potential or capacity map along with that prescription or flat rate. So it's as easy as a phone call, I guess you could say. But Tim, was there anything else that we talked about this morning?
A couple things on the back table. There's a drawing for a drone if you want to throw your name in the box there. A couple other things is if you refer somebody, we'll provide, and with Chad too. So for the water management, I think it's 10 cents, and if the Varimax piece you refer acres, we'll give you 25 cents an acre. If you want to refer somebody else and they sign up those acres to run, so we'll provide that as a kickback to you. A couple other things: if you sign up 1,000 acres, we'll give you a pellet grill, and then over 500 acres, we'll give you it's like a Yukon cooler or it's a Polaris cooler or whatnot. So just a couple promotion things that are going on this week. So just to make you aware.
The one other thing that we hadn't mentioned, you had heard Terry Avion earlier. So, and I've worked with some of you guys in the past with aerial images or drone images, and I think I've told all of you that we've quit. Most of you we've quit trying to collect drone imagery because we lost a lot of money trying to do that, and got tired of losing money. So we've struggled to look for affordable aerial image. The satellite imagery is good for the nitrogen component, or is good enough for the nitrogen component. But when we look for other management things, disease, things like that, we've struggled to find what I call affordable and reliable aerial imaging. And I actually, Cole's here from Terra Avion, and so we've kind of partnered with them as a way to give guys more affordable aerial images. And the way, before I turn it over to Cole, so one of the things that I've seen people struggle with is with imagery, whether it be satellite or what, is that, you know, they have it, but then it's kind of like a scouting report. Early in the season, you might read it. By the end of the season, you don't care about opening it up and looking at it. So we're dedicated to make this work. That we're dedicating Mondays or whenever that image comes in to the office, that we spend essentially the entire day looking at images and going through those and scouring for things that we may pick up. So with our customers, we'll basically give them a summary. Some guys have said they do not want, they don't want anything unless they see a problem with it. Others have said, I at least want to know, yeah, everything looks good. So it depends on what you want, but we'll notify people that sign up acres of anything that they have problems with. So you'll have eyes looking at those images every week as they come in. And Cole, I'll let you give a little bit of.
Yeah, so we're flying with a manned aircraft, and it's coming out of Fort Morgan. You know, the big things I see, I'll give you three, is one, we're going to fly 15 times throughout the growing season. 9 of those images are going to be weekly images throughout the heart of the growing season. The second main point is that we're offering a thermal image that nobody else is offering, and with that thermal image, we can spot issues in the field earlier. You think of, you know, a sick human, usually they've got a fever. Think of a plant that is stressing or is quote unquote sick, they're going to show a fever as well. And so we can see that hot spot in the field before anybody else can with NDVI and with obviously natural color is what we see with our own eyes. And the last one is that you know, we're 18 centimeter resolution. So we're going to be able to get down, you know, the size of a half a sheet of paper. As you can see up here, you know, some of the different types of satellite providers that are out in the field now is, you know, you got a 90-foot base path, and R7 is pretty common. Maybe not out in this area, but other places that, you know, that's 98 feet. So that's the size of a baseball diamond, and you can't really get down to the row and see what's going on. With our imagery at 18 centimeters or roughly 7 inches, you can get down to the row and see exactly what's going on to pick out any stress, any pest issue, any type of man, I'm drawing a blank. Any type of, you know, that warrants you know, an agronomist to go out there and, you know, look at the field. And so, you know, our imagery is pretty much useful if we don't go out and ground truth it. And so that's what these guys here at Godsey have just kind of partnered up with and said, you know, we want to go out there and look to see if it warrants going to look at. So.
And that's the one thing that attracted me to Terra Avion was the thermal imagery. I think that will allow us to catch water issues earlier than NDVI does. So, any questions? I know some of you guys had to get going for a marketing, or you got another meeting after this. But is there any questions? Trying to think that the pricing sheets for the Varimax and the water stuff is in that handout. The discounts aren't listed on there as far as acres or package deals. So if you have questions on those, just get a hold of myself or Preston, and we can visit with you about that. The way we price stuff really is the value that we perceive in it. So we figured, like the irrigation stuff, where we've saved any year, we've at least saved two inches this year, and a lot of stuff that we compared kind of across the fence. Most everybody, it seemed like, was anywhere from 19 to 22 inches of water that they pumped. And you know, our averages were around 14 or 15. So, and this may be extreme year, I'm not gonna guarantee that next year, but, you know, if I did my calculations right as far as kilowatt price of electricity, you know, it's costing $3 to $5 per acreage pumped. So this year with this, you know, we saved, if we use that $3, I mean, we saved about $15 an acre with just electricity costs. And not to mention the, you know, for conserving water, I mean, that's a hard one to put a value on, but, and then same thing with the Varimax, they kind of did that too. If you look at long-term trends of any of those, using any kind of nitrogen algorithm with sensors, the long-term average is about $10 an acre is what you save in nitrogen costs. And that, I mean, that varies. Some years it may call for more. I have no doubt last year, you know, if people were following the Varimax, and where we were using aerial image for nitrogen Rex, it did call for more than they usually apply. However, their protein contents were a little bit higher, and their yields were higher. So it's not a given every year that you're going to save on in costs, but the long-term average would suggest about $10 an acre. So in corn and wheat, from all the data that I've seen. So.
Tell us about your app you're going to come up with.
Oh, okay. So, I wish I could just plug my phone in, but I haven't got the full working. Where's it at? Oh, way up there. So this is just just 3 screenshots off of it. So we'll have this basically mapping your farm, your fields, be color coded for that. This is basically the managed fields thing. So out of the website, we'll have this has current water status and irrigation required to reach target. So at any time you're out in the field, you can pull that up and say you're number 1, and it says, all right, I need I'm at 75% and I need 0.6 to get to target. So there'll be that, and then 2, adding water and fertilizer events. So if you're putting 1/2 inch on everything, is all you do is hit water event, 1/2 inch, and then hit select all, which would put 1/2 inch on every field. So that streamlines that, or if you're adding fertilizer, you can do the same thing. You'll have a drop-down list of fertilizers, whether it's 32 or 2805. You'll hit that, and then you can do that even if you don't have cell reception. It'll store it in your app until you get back to cell reception or connected again, and then it'll send it to the cloud to put it into the website, if that makes sense.
We'd be able to enter actual meter readings.
So that's one request I just had the other day. So I think we will. I don't know if, and it probably would be simple enough. I was going to say I don't know if we'll have that in the app or if we would just have that on the website. But it'll probably be one or both of those locations. So that's a good. Like I said, yeah, that's a good comment. And I hadn't thought about that the other day. We've had a request within the last couple months as far as fertilizer tanks, monitoring those as they keep a better idea of actually when that nitrogen went on. So we're trying to figure out a way to do that too, so you can enter starting and ending point. So no, that's a good comment about entering the meter reading, so you know actually where you're at on there. It'd be pretty simple to do. So, Preston, make sure I remember that, okay?
You got it.
So yeah, we've got plans of trying to, work with sprinkler manufacturers, and as long as they're willing to work with us, we'll see. But, and we still have got a lot of pivot panels that aren't connected to the cloud, so it doesn't really make a difference, or in those situations, it doesn't make a difference. So, but when they are connected to the cloud, we want to be able to grab that data and automatically enter it in there. So, the other things that we talked about this morning is, you know, I guess from what I never really thought about it till this year. Some of the sprinklers that I watch on a daily basis, of always setting the stop. You know, no matter even if it was July, you know, hit the stop, so it might be off 2, 3, 4 hours. That's where a lot of our water savings, I think, came from. Is that, you know, the sprinklers, if they were running 36 hours, putting on 6/10, you know, they'd be off for a few hours anyways. You know, that added up over the season, and that was kind of an eye opener to me. It was like, yeah, no, those as long as you got decent water, you know, good wells, those sprinklers can afford to be off for a few hours, and that added up over the course of a season. And I think that's where a large portion of our water savings came from, was just by not running those continuous. And then let's see what else. We were discussing this morning on application amounts. In the sand, in the hard ground, you know, we maintained, most of our passes were anywhere from a 1/2 inch to 75/100. In the sand, I don't think, there wasn't very many times we were over 6/10, was it, Preston?
No.
So that's one thing that we learned with the drain gauges and water holding capacity calculations and stuff, is that you know, we probably ran those pivots more, you know, more revolutions during the season, but we ran them at lower amounts. So typically 4/10 to 6/10 with most of them.
Which we kind of followed, you know, that early season, mid season. So when we changed our irrigation, where we wanted to set our target rate to about 95%, that's typically when we jumped from 3500s in that early season to about 6/10 or maybe 6500s.
So nope, if there's no other questions, like I said, just if you have follow-up questions, get a hold of us. Like I said, we want to make this as easy as possible for you, and we're not trying to replace boots on the ground, because that's still very important. These are tools, so if you visit with your agronomist or consultant and they have questions, please have them get a hold of us, because we're not trying to replace what they do. So.
You're signing up to Varimax, or do we have
Yeah.
to go to town?
Yep. So all the wheat acres, all the corn acres will go through this, through the PCM website. And then we'll take, we're doing the Varimax on their site, but we're basically taking care of all that, so you guys don't have to re-enter fields and stuff like that for the wheat. But corn will all be through here, so. Good question. All right.
You guys can meet me at the back of the room with your checkbooks. Okay.
Pay for the